ask you guys a serious question before Pastor Joel gets up here. My question is, and I want an honest answer, honest answer. I asked this in the first service, and I would say at least half of the people in the room raised their hands. Is anybody in this room feeling spiritually empty? Like it's just like I'm just not feeling it right now. I want honestly, raise your hands higher, higher. Show me. I'm not going to embarrass you. I want you to look around. Keep your hands up. Is anybody here feeling spiritually empty? Like it's like we could sing all day long about how you fight my battles, and I still don't feel it. Like it's just like I feel like bleh on the inside. Is there anybody here? Raise your hands higher. Come on. Don't be afraid. It's okay. It's okay to be honest. Thank you for your honesty. The reason I'm asking you that question is because I'm getting the sense at the warehouse, and it's not like a warehouse thing, and I'm certainly not beating you up about this. It's just an observation that I'm noticing that like there's just a sense of like whatever, toward God, toward the things of the things that we're talking about, toward anything that has to do with spiritual. I mean, like the band was like pouring their hearts out. And again, this is not being critical, but I like look around and I see like a bunch of people just like, hmm, 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 hmm. And the reason I think that is because, well, it's a number of things. And I don't like to blame the weather. We're in a weird time of the year, like where it's not spring, but it is winter. Like we want winter to be over, but it's not over yet. And you feel that sense of like, just this kind of depression of the end of the winter time. But I think that a lot of times the reason why we feel this way is because sometimes it feels like God is like MIA. He is not around. And when we talk to him, even when we try to get close to him, it doesn't feel like he's always there. And that's why I think you're going to be interested in what Pastor Joel has to say today, because we are finishing our series called I Have Questions. And answering the question, is God even listening? Does God even care? And for those of you who rose your hand, maybe that's like a question that you're asking, and you're like, I don't know if he does, because it certainly feels like he's nowhere to be found. At least I'm not experiencing him. And so whether you're in that stage or not in that stage, I think that as you hear what Pastor Joel has to say, it's going to speak to your heart. He's going to challenge you at the end with something special. So watch this little video and then give it up for Pastor Joel.
Thank you so much, Pastor JD. And Pastor JD said it perfectly. Just this idea of we all go through seasons like that. We all go through seasons in our lives. Maybe some of you are finding yourself in a season like this right now where you're just like blah, and it feels like, and maybe even in this season, it feels like you're trying. Like it feels like you're trying to talk to God, like you're trying to build that relationship, but you just maybe at times you almost feel like your prayers are like bouncing off the ceiling. You're like, is this even making it there? Like, am I even like completing the signal here? It's kind of like back in the day. I make it sound like this is ancient, but like I was old when this commercial came out. But in the '90s, in the '90s, there's this commercial series for Verizon. That it was everybody knew him as the "Can you hear me now" guy. All right, he's since defected over to Sprint like a couple of years ago and started doing commercials with them. But the Verizon guy, the "Can you hear me now" guy, like he's seriously, I think he's the one that took Verizon like and put them on the map. Like this was such a brilliant commercial series that they did because everybody related to it and it made you feel like their service was so reliable that you're like, that's why I drop calls all the time, is I don't have that, because you see this commercial series and this guy's like traveling the world, he's everywhere, and he always has service. But what he does in this totally reflects, what we often, like you've probably done this on the phone yourself. So go ahead and check out this old commercial real quick.
Can you hear me now? Good. Can you hear me now?
How do you build America's largest wireless network?
Can you hear me now? Good.
By never being satisfied.
Can you hear me now? Good.
Until no matter where you go.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Your call goes through.
Can you hear me now? Good.
All right, so back in the day, that was the commercial series, and there were literally dozens of them. Like, it was always exciting, like, once every couple months when a new one would come out, and you get to see where he was. Like, he's in an igloo, and he's, I don't know, in space, and like, all this random, like, stupid stuff, and he's always has cell phone service. It was amazing. Like, I definitely think they would not necessarily film, even still this day, like, like 2 decades later, they would not necessarily film that commercial here at the warehouse, because if you've ever tried to like answer your phone here, you're like, hello, can you, mom? Are you here yet? No, I'll be out. No, you're not. You're not. What? I can't. And they'd be really bad for like commercial for Verizon. But anyway, like we relate to that though, right? Like how many of you guys have had that moment on a phone when the other person can't hear you at all, or you can't hear them? Like you can just tell like service is not like probably all of us have experienced that at one point or the other. So you've had that frustration where the other person couldn't hear you on the other side. How about this? Raise your hand for each one of these if it applies to you. Have you ever struggled being heard in a noisy room? Like you're in a big crowded room and you're like trying to talk to somebody and you're like, and it's annoying. Or how about this? Have you ever had to repeat yourself because the other person just simply wasn't even paying attention? Like they were like you're talking, you're telling them something, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, I'll start over. Like I'm at least nice enough. If I zoned out when you were telling me something, I'll admit like I'm sorry, I spaced. Can you start over? What about this? How many of you have ever had something important you were trying to share with somebody and you just felt like nobody cared? Like you felt like you're trying to. This is really really important to you. It matters. It can be a big thing. You can put your hands down. It can be a big thing about like something serious in your life, like something hard that you're going through. It could be like a relatively small thing that you're just passionate about. I know like a little known secret about me. None of you guys know this. I've never confessed this before, but I'm a huge nerd. All right, so I know, a shocker. The gasp. I get it. But no, I'm a huge nerd, and Pastor JD's not. He's not so nerdy. And so like I'll start like describing something to him in nerd speech, and he's like, you can just see it's almost like blinds on like a window. You can just see he's like turning. I'm like, all right, as he like blanks out as I'm talking through like my nerd talk. You can just tell like we're not like talking about the same interest level. Like my passion for this is not anywhere on his radar of interest in that. Or what about this? Last but not least, have you ever poured your heart out to someone and it turned out you felt like they weren't listening at all? Like you get to first period at school and you had the worst day the day before. You sit you're next to your best friend and you're telling them about your yesterday and you're brokenhearted about it, and they're just like, uh-huh. Yeah. And then like either you can tell they're zoning out or they change the subject before you've ever like even gotten to the point. Yeah. All these things, like these are things that we've all dealt with, we've all experienced, and we can all relate to them. But the other thing that we recognize from these is anytime you've had a moment like that, it's frustrating. From the other person can't hear you on the other end of the phone call, to you're pouring your heart out and it just seems like that person's not paying attention at all. We've all experienced it, and it's very, very frustrating. And especially, this is true when we communicate to people. Like that, this literally happens when we communicate, when we talk to other people. But sometimes we feel this way when we're trying to talk to God. Sometimes we feel this way when we're praying and we're wondering, God, are you even listening? Are you even paying attention? Are you zoned out? Like, do you hear what I'm trying to share here? And we do this. Like we feel this way. Now the difference between these two things is, with other people, sometimes it's reality. Sometimes they really blanked. But with God, He's always fully present and He always fully cares. But because we've been conditioned by other people who we can see all the time, and we see them zoning out, we see them not paying attention, we see what we were sharing not matter so much to them, whatever that might be. Sometimes we take those experiences and we try to apply them to God when when that's not necessarily true, and we almost pour that onto Him. And so for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about some of life's toughest questions that we ask, like when I'm going through, when I see injustice in the world, where's God? What's God doing to help solve that? Or when God feels far away, how can we know and be assured that He's close and that He's intimate? Or when life is hard, how can we know that God is still good even in the midst of our toughest battles? Like these are all things that we wrestle with, and today we're dealing with something that I think really is important, even as we process all the other ones. Even if you didn't still quite work through some answers on the other ones, this other part's kind of the most important key to solving these, and that's that question that we feel in the midst. And here's the thing: is this particular question we ask it most often when we find ourselves in the biggest trials. All right, and that is, God, can you hear me? With God, can you hear me? You never stop and ask God, like the day I got married, I was ever like, God, can you hear me? Like, are you paying attention to me at all? Like, no, during really good times, you don't think those things, you don't question those things. But when you find yourself in the midst of a battle or a struggle, or pain, that's when we start wondering and asking these questions. So this is a question that always comes up, or often comes up, when we are facing life's biggest challenges. I remember for me, um, uh, 2 years before I ended up giving my life to Christ, my dad ended up getting really, really sick with pretty severe cancer, and I remember going through that battle with him, and 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 oddly enough, that's part of the journey that helped lead me to Jesus. It was wrestling with that greater purpose and understanding of life that actually drew me to God. But when I came to know Jesus, all my problems didn't just like instantly go away. It wasn't like everything got solved and I had this perfect life that was all sunshine and rainbows and easy and you're just like coasting. Like it wasn't like that at all. Like life still had challenges, life still had difficulties. Like my dad still had cancer. I still had stuff that I had to work through personally from just all my life experiences and all that. Like I had to grow through those things. But what I found is once I allowed Jesus into my life, I recognized that I was no longer going through these things alone. Like now I had Jesus walking through this arm in arm with me. All right. And in fact, as I shared a couple weeks ago, I could see that, like, now that I had him in my life, I could see that he was always present with me before. I was just failing to recognize it. All right. And so the big thing that changed was now I recognized that I had help. I recognized that I wasn't doing it alone, and I recognized that there was somebody there walking through it with me that could hear me, that could hear my heart, that was feeling every single thing I was feeling along with it. And the thing was, is sometimes things got better, sometimes things got harder. Like my dad's cancer ended up going away for a few years, which was absolutely amazing. It was a huge praise, and then when I was in college, it ended up coming back, and during that season was really, really tough. Like I was having to go to school. I was go to college full time. I was working 25 hours a week. I was running another student, like I was doing a regular job. I was running a student ministry. I was playing soccer and all that stuff. I wasn't good, but I was playing college soccer and all this stuff. And I was trying to like juggle all these things, and I just felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulder. And maybe you feel like that sometimes, like you're carrying all that weight. And while I'm carrying all that weight, there's times where it was really, really hard. And I'm like, God, like, can you hear me? Like, do you see what I'm going through? Like, I'm taking every single week, I'm taking my dad to his chemo treatments and all this other stuff. I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm walking through this. I'm carrying all this weight. And at times it was easy to feel to have to wrestle with that question, like, God, can you hear me? Or are my prayers just bouncing off the ceiling? But was in the midst of that challenge that I could see that God was always there. That God was always there. I remember being on a mission trip. I went on a mission trip to Africa while I was in college, while I was doing all that other stuff. And I went to Africa, and I'm there for about 3.5 weeks. And while we're there, we're doing all this great service. All these amazing things are happening. But even while I'm doing all this like really, really cool like ministry, like world changing stuff, I was wrestling with that. I was wrestling with feeling like I was doing this all alone. And it seemed like everybody else had this really super deep connection with God, and I felt like I was missing something. And I remember one particular night, I'm hanging out by the bonfire. We had like a team of like 75 student missionaries there, plus like all the other like adult leaders and stuff. And we're hanging out by the bonfire with some people, and I see there's this group of like 10 or 15 students off to the side, and they form like this little prayer circle, and they're praying over some stuff. They're praying for some stuff that God's laid on their hearts. And so I walk over to this prayer circle. Everybody's eyes are closed, their heads are bowed, and they're talking, or they're praying. And all of a sudden, this girl, and I still this day, I couldn't tell you her name. Because there's a big group and all this stuff. And she had no idea that I even entered the circle, because everybody's like looking down and all that stuff. And I walk over to the circle, and I'm just standing there, just wanting to be a part of something that God's doing. And all of a sudden, she starts praying out loud, and she says, Joel, I feel like right now God's telling me to tell you that I'm not far away, that I'm right here, and I've been here the whole time. So stop thinking and worrying if I left you. I've been here right beside you this whole time. So stop looking for me. I'm right here. all along. And that was exactly what I needed during that trip, was that reminder that no matter my mistakes, no matter whatever I've done, no matter my struggles, any of that stuff, God was right there walking through it with me. And I think that's what God wants a lot of you to hear today. Is maybe you feel similar, like you're walking through challenges like that, and you feel like you're doing it all alone. You're wondering if God's close. You're wondering if He's hearing you. All right. And here's the thing: is the book of Psalms is just like that. Throughout the whole book of Psalms, you see all these different people writing, and at times they're writing about things like praising God for certain things. Other times they're wondering and they're worrying. Other times they're even asking, like, God, are you even listening? Can you even hear me? All right. And literally, God allows this to be written down in His Word because He knows that ever since the fall, ever since Adam and Eve, ever since we left being in God's perfect presence, where we could literally see Him and hear Him with our own eyes, our own ears, face to face, that this is going to be the greatest challenge that we're going to face from that moment, is feeling like we're doing this on our own, even though when God's right there. And so what you see throughout the book of Psalms, you see several things about prayer. First, you see people pray silently. You can see that you can pray silently. You can pray out loud. You can pray with your eyes open. You can pray with your eyes closed. If you're driving, I recommend open. You can thank God. You can praise God. You can apologize to God because, yes, you're still human and you make mistakes. You can ask God for help. All right, which is what we probably most often do, is when we find ourselves in a hard time. All right. But God wants us to come to Him in conversation through everything. See, because that's pretty much what prayer is. Prayer is simply having a conversation with God. It's talking to Him, but it's also remembering that that conversation is two ways. And so looking at one of the Psalms really quick, looking at Psalm 91, this is what it says, and this is what the writer writes down. And we'll skip a little bit of it, but he says this. He says, "The one who lives under the protection of the Most High dwells in the shadow of the Almighty." He says, "I will say of the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. He Himself will deliver you from the hunter's net, from the destructive plague. He will cover you with His feathers, and you will take refuge under His wings. His faithfulness will be a protective shield. You will not fear the terror of the night and the arrow that flies by day, the plague that stalks in the darkness, or the pestilence that ravages at noon." See, and he goes on for about 10 more verses. And he talks about more of these things. He lays out about the battles and all the other stuff that he's facing. But this is what I want you to see that the author does. He lists all sorts of difficulties. He talks about enemies, diseases, fear, attacks, armies, death. These are all things that this writer feels like are knocking right on his door. But like he's facing down each and every one of these giants. All right. But then he also goes through and he speaks to each and every one of these things, these questions or these fears that he raises. And he writes down essentially saying that even in difficult times, God always protects us. He always gives us rest. God is always safe. He can be trusted. He will rescue us. He cares for us. He is powerful. He is with us, and He's listening. He recognizes in this moment, as he's laying out all of his distresses, all of his worries, all of his cares, he also stops to recognize that God is there. God's listening, and God is intimately a part of his life. And John, one of Jesus' closest disciples, in his book, First John, he writes about prayer a little bit. Now, remember, this is literally one of Jesus' best friends. And this is what he says. He says, "Now this is the confidence that we have before Him, that whenever we ask anything according to His will, He hears us." He hears us. And so John's talking about this idea that when we come to Jesus, the more that we spend time with Him. Now, remember, John and Jesus were like best friends, all right? Like they hung out together all the time for an entire 3 years, all right? John had a very, very close relationship with Jesus. And if any of you have a best friend, you know that the more you hang out with that person, the more you start to look and act like that person, right? There's days that Pastor JD and I walk into the office literally wearing the exact same shirt. And we're like, you got to go home and change. Because we got a meeting today and we look ridiculous, like we look like goons. But the thing is the more you hang out with somebody, the more you become like them. The more that the things that they're passionate about, you become passionate about, and vice versa. And so the more what we see in John is that the more he spent time with Jesus, the more he looked like and reflected Him. In fact, even the stuff that he started to ask God for started to reflect more of the heart of God Himself. You see, and And here's the deal is you might not be able to walk side by side with Jesus like John did, but we can still develop a deeper trust and more close relationship with him. And that the more we do that, the more we grow in our relationship with him, the more that we trust and know that when we're going through hard times, when we're in the midst of that valley, he's listening, he's there, he's right beside us. And so then when we start asking that question, when life hurts, is God listening? The better you get to know him, the more time you spend with him, the more you'll just get to know his character and his heart. And so to eventually where it becomes, well, I know he's listening because I just know him that well. I know him that well that he would never leave me. He would never abandon me. He would never forsake me and leave me up to this on my own. Like I trust that he's here. And it's kind of like this. Prayer is very, very much like this. It's like one of two things for many people. And that is either like a megaphone or like headphones. See, prayer for all of us can be like a megaphone or like headphones. And what I mean by that is a megaphone is built for one thing. A megaphone is built for giving directives to somebody else. All right. The times in my life I use a megaphone, all right, is when we're at camp or something and I need to talk to a ginormous group of people and give them instructions on how to do something. All right. Like megaphones do not communicate, hey, let's have a conversation. You know what I mean? Like if one of you came and said, hey, can we like get together and talk? Like, can we talk about something in your office really quick? Like, yeah, sure. What's up? If like you came and we sat down in my office and to talk, and I busted out a megaphone to talk to you, you're not going to feel very comfortable about this conversation. You're not going to feel the two-way nature of this conversation. It's going to feel very one way, right? And that's how it is with us and God. Is a lot of times we approach God with a megaphone, and we're like yelling at God, like, hey, God, like do something, and we're like I didn't hear him, like, you know, he never talks back to me, you know, and so it's because we're taking a megaphone approach. Meanwhile, these are my headphones that I use when I'm mowing the grass. All right, because my mower's like stupid loud, and I love listening to music. So this is what I use because they're noise canceling, so they block out. All right, they block out the rest of the sound. All right, and they make my music loud. All right. And so, and the reason why is, so these actually do two things. All right. Because they also have like a microphone. So when my wife calls me, it's like, hey, how much longer are you going to be? I'm like, all right, another hour. I can talk back to her, but this thing's like decent at talking, but it's really, really great at listening. All right. And so that's what we have to learn to do is learn to take a headphone approach to our prayer life. That when you're talking to God, like these are built for talking, but they're specifically designed for listening, for slowing down. And what helps them do that is they block everything else out, right? They block out all the other noise. They block out all the other distractions so that you can zero in and hear what you really need to hear. All right, I don't need to hear my mower. I don't need to hear this other noise. I don't need to hear that tennis ball that I know I shot out of the lawnmower. All right, like all the other. I have a rule. I run over all the kids. If the kids' toys in the yard, I'm going to run over it. Like, no, you had your chance to save it. All right, you saw me get on the mower. But all that to say, like these things, they block out all the other noise, the distractions, so you can zero in on what you really need to hear. So when you come to God with whatever it is that's on your heart, you need to come in with a headphone approach rather than a microphone approach. Saying, all right, God, like I'm ready to talk to you about this, but I'm also ready to slow down and listen. Because sometimes God's going to give you directions on how to make something better, something that he wants you to do to help work on bringing a remedy to that situation. Sometimes God's going to give you comforting words that says like, hey, I know this sucks. My heart's breaking. While your heart's breaking, my heart breaks too. All right. And so I can't take away every ounce of pain, but I can let you know that I'm here just to wrap my arms around you and love you through the midst of this. And other times God just says, be patient and just wait. Just wait until I tell you go. Just wait until I tell you yes. Just wait until you have my firm answer. But until then, just wait. And when we stop and listen, it's when God saves us a whole lot of hurt, saves us a whole lot of heartbreak, and even just brings in comfort when that's what we need. And so today, what you've probably been wondering what these giant walls of milk crates are for, and what this represents is over in Jerusalem, where the temple used to be, is still one of the walls, and it's known as the Western Wall because there's the Western Wall of the temple, but it's also known as the Wailing Wall. And this is where people travel from all over the world, and they come there and they pray at the Wailing Wall. All right, and they pray, and if you look really closely, you can see little pieces of white paper stuck in the cracks of that wall. And the reason why is because people, when they go to pray, they will actually put a prayer request in there. And there's nothing magic about it. It's not like God's like, oh, you put it in the wall, so like now I'm obligated to give you what you want. All right, that's idolatry. What it is it's saying, it's taking that thing and it's handing it over to God and saying, you know what, God, I fully trust you with this. I'm handing it over to you. Do what you can do. All right, and so that's what I want you to do. If you notice already that there's pens and papers under your chair, and what I want you to do is I want you to take this moment. I'm going to play a song. It's called "Honest" by Influence Music, and it's all about just being honest with God, saying, you know what, God, sometimes you feel far away. But I'm going to remind myself that you are close, you're intimate. Even when I feel like you're distant, I know you're there. I know you didn't leave me. I know you didn't abandon me. And so, God, I'm bringing everything to you. I'm bringing my joy. I'm bringing my hurt. And I'm laying it all before you. So while this song plays, I want you to write down some of your prayer requests. You can come, you can put it in these crates. And just when you do that, just know that you are laying this before the feet of God and saying, you know what, God, I'm handing this over to you. So go ahead and do that. All right. Well, I thank you guys all for just taking that moment and just really handing stuff over to God. And what I want this to be for you is just like a relay race runner on a track team is, I want this to be like taking that baton and you're running and you're running as hard and fast as you can, but then you realize it's time for you to hand it off. It's time for you to hand that thing off to God and say, you know what, God, I trust you with this. And so that's what my prayer is for each and every single one of you in this room. So let me close this in prayer. And I just want you to know that when you pray, when you hand something over to God, he's really listening. He really cares, and he cares about it just as much as you do, if not more. And so I want you to know that every single time that you lift something up to him, that whether he says yes, whether he says no, or whether he says not yet, know that every answer he gives you is because he loves you and is because it's for your own good. And so it's not always easy to remember that when you're in the midst of life's trials, but it's true. God, we take these requests, we take all these things that we laid before you, and God, we just trust you with them. God, we know that you love us. We know that you want what's best for us, and we know that life is sometimes hard because we live after the fall, and life, the world is full of sin and pain. But God, we know that you are a restorer, that you make all things new, and God, that you are good. And so, God, we trust you with these things that we lay before you, and we just lay them at your feet, knowing you are God and we are not. And we just pray that you move in a way that only you can move, and that you do things that only you can do, and that you move in our hearts and help us to grow closer to you. In your name we pray. Amen.